everyone. We'll start our work session or training this afternoon. So I call this meeting or this board training to order at 5:34 p.m. Roll call.
Nereida Cantu, present.
Mary Hernandez, present.
Espi Ochoa, present.
Alda Benavides, present. Dr. Sines, I declare a quorum. Will everyone please stand for the pledge? And Dr. Sines, will you lead us?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Ms. Herrera has a sign-in sheet, so just be sure for members of the audience that everyone signs in for this work session. Public comments?
We have no public comments,
Okay.
Dr. Benavides.
Thank you. So then we'll proceed to item number 5. Subject of this training is as follows: procurement laws, procurement process, bid ranking, construction, vendor selection using competitive seal proposals, and vendor selection using job order contracts. So I don't know who's going to start with the training, but we're ready to start.
Okay. Good afternoon, Dr. Benavides, members of our School Board of Trustees, Dr. Sines, and everyone present. This afternoon, we will be covering procurement laws, procurement process, the bid ranking, and for construction, we will have Mr. Joya, Executive Director for Facilities, review vendor selection using the competitive seal proposals process and vendor selection using the job order contracts process. So we'll start with procurement laws. And basically, before you see the hierarchy of purchasing authority. So there are laws at the legal level, which include the state and the federal government. And then there's local policy at the local level. So the laws from the state and the federal government become our legal policies. Those we don't have a choice in following. They are the law, we have to follow them. Local policy is policy derived at the local school district level, which is subject to reviews, updates from our school board, of course, in coordination with TASB, who maintains our policy board manual online. So our administrative procedures are derived from the legal and local policies. As we know, sometimes procurement is not black and white. Sometimes there's gray areas, and we need help deciphering some of the information that may be that we may be dealing with, that we may be faced with. And so when that occurs, we will seek our legal counsel, and legal counsel at times may have to reach out to the state of Texas Attorney General for an opinion. So the driving force for purchasing when it comes to laws in the state of Texas is Texas Education Code 44. So we will spend the next few slides talking about Texas Education Code 44.031. But we'd also like to mention to you that there are other laws that also come into play, such as the Professional Services Procurement Act through Texas Government Code 2254, which is also part of the Chapter 44 in the law. And basically, that states that if we're going to contract for engineering services, architectural services, accounting, our attorneys, real estate appraisers, land surveyors, interior design, physicians, RNs, etc., that those services cannot be acquired through a competitive bid, through the competitive procurement process, but rather through the Professional Services Procurement Act, which stipulates that we need to hire those services on the basis of competence and qualifications. Once we do that, and we establish the competence and qualifications for those providers, we rank them, and then we try to derive an agreement with the highest ranked provider. And so if we can agree and negotiate an agreement, then we'll come before the board and make a recommendation. If we cannot agree through the negotiations with the highest ranked, then we need to finalize our negotiations in writing, and we would go through the second ranked until we either derive at a contract or we don't at all. And then we need to start the process again. So that's basically how professional services work. Then we have the Code of Federal Regulations, Part 200, that governs federal procurement. And so there are additional stipulations that are required by the federal government that we must observe when our procurements are federally funded. So we work hand in hand with our federal programs director and with our federal programs accountant, and of course with Mr. Joel Trevino, to make sure that our federal funds expenditures are compliant with the Code of Federal Regulations by the federal government. There are many stipulations, many contract terms and conditions that are required when we purchase with federal funds. So we make sure that as the laws change, we update our contract, our school district standard form contract, to make sure that it's compliant. Whenever we purchase using federal funds also, we make sure that vendors that we are contracting with submit what we call the EDGAR certification, which includes all these clauses that are required by the federal government. Okay, so as I mentioned, our driving force for purchasing in the state of Texas is Government Code 44.031. So basically what the state says is that whenever we purchase $50,000 or more in the aggregate, district-wide, in a 12-month period, we must acquire those goods and services through one of the 7 methods defined by the state. These include the competitive bidding for services other than construction services, the competitive sealed proposals for services other than construction services, a request for proposals for services other than construction services, an interlocal contract, a method provided by Chapter 2269 Government Code for construction services, the reverse auction method as defined by Section 2155.062D in the Government Code, or through the formation of a political subdivision corporation under Section 304.001 of the Local Government Code. So I will give you a little synopsis of each of these methods. The competitive bidding process is used when we can identify the actual goods that we are purchasing. So say, for example, that we are going to purchase instructional and office supplies or custodial supplies that we keep in stock at Central Warehouse. We have those items clearly defined. We establish reorder points. We prepare a line item listing, and so we comply with the state requirements as far as advertising. So we're required by state law to advertise in the county where the district resides in, and so we have to advertise in 2 separate weeks, and then we have to wait 2 weeks after the second advertisement before the deadline. And so we comply with that advertising requirement. And so we invite all the vendors that are registered in our e-bidding system and any vendors that also see the advertisement and express interest. So we guide them through the registration process and they participate. They're given an opportunity to submit a bid. And so they're able to provide their bid for those goods that we itemized. In a competitive bidding scenario, there is no room for negotiating. So we stipulate what we want, and price is not the only determining factor. We'll go over the awarding factors in a little while, in another slide, but pricing is not the only factor. We can consider the quality of the goods, the reputation of the vendor, etc. However, as I mentioned, there is no room for negotiating. So we cannot say all of a sudden, okay, so I stipulated I wanted a case of white paper, 20-pound, but now I want a 30-pound. Well, I cannot do that in a competitive bidding process. Okay, the next one is a competitive sealed proposal for services other than construction. So say, for example, that we are interested in a learning management system for our school district, and we've defined exactly what that management system entails. And that management system will include professional training as well as software, etc. So we define all the parameters. We comply with the advertising requirements, specification development. It's issued, and at the time that it's issued, we realized that, oh, you know what, rather than it being for 5 schools, we actually wanted also for all middle schools and high schools. Well, we have the ability to negotiate that, but even before we get to that point, we can revise our specifications, or if we realize later that we got a really good value and now we have enough money in the budget to negotiate, and instead of 5 schools, we want to include another 5 schools, we can do that through the negotiation process. So the competitive sealed proposal allows for that type of flexibility. That's the main difference to the competitive sealed bid process. So then we have the request for proposals, and the request for proposals, the way that it's typically used is that proposals don't have to be sealed. So in our school district, all our requests for proposals, we call them RFPs, are sealed, with the exception of the consultant services, because the Texas Education Agency, through the Financial Accountability System Resource Guide, allow us to have requests for proposals that can be opened through an extended period of time. So that's why you see that periodically we come to add vendors to the consultant services. Okay, so that's how that one works. There's room for negotiation as well. Then we have the interlocal contract. The interlocal contract is a method that's used for us to engage in an agreement with a local government, whether it be a political subdivision, whether it be through a purchasing cooperative, a state agency, and that's for those types of organizations either in the state of Texas or out of state. And that's through Government Code 791. Then we have the construction services method, which is through Chapter 2261, and Joya will talk about that in a little bit. The 6th method is the reverse auction, and we've used this method before. It's actually a lot of fun, and this one's used when we're going to purchase in volume, and we have a qualified products list, whether it be maybe for floor wax or copy paper. And just the way you go to an auction and there's bidders that bid a higher price in a reverse auction, the bidders are actually bidding in reverse. So they can start at $50 a case of paper and it can go down to 40 to 30 to 20. And so this mechanism is available to us through our e-bidding system. We have not used it in a while. Then we have the formation of a political subdivision corporation, and this is how we acquire our retail energy. So there can be a formation of a political subdivision whereby several school districts come together and they procure collectively. So that's the method we use for our retail energy. There's some exceptions to the requirement by the state as far as complying with the $50,000 or over in the aggregate, and that is when there's a true emergency where there's damage or destruction to real property, to equipment, to a school facility, etc., where the board would say that if we were to wait until we process a bid or a proposal, it would impair the operation of the school district or school district activities. And so that's why we try to have contracts in place, whether they be contracts that we process at the district level or through the purchasing cooperatives, so that we do not have to be faced with that type of situation. And in the 26 years that I have been in purchasing, our school board has never, ever had to declare an emergency as defined by the state in regards to procurement. And then there's the sole source, which we really try to stay away from as much as possible, because if we are audited and a purchase is labeled as a sole source, and the auditor determines that there is another product or another service that could satisfy that need, it wouldn't necessarily be a sole source. So sole source is hardly ever used. It's highly discouraged in our school district, and the state allows it only for like captive component parts, where we wouldn't be able to find them. Say that a big AC system was to break down and we wouldn't be able to find the parts that match that system only from that vendor, then a sole source would apply. But really and truly, for equipment, even those vendors are on bid, whether it be through us or the purchasing cooperative. So we try to stay away from sole source as much as possible to protect our district. So the next slide gives you an illustration of the procurement threshold. So if you recall me saying earlier that if we spend $50,000 or more in the aggregate district-wide in a 12-month period, then that category of goods or services must go through one of the 7 methods defined by the state. So in this example, say that we have 12 campuses purchasing nurses' supplies, and their amounts range from $1,400 to $9,000 in that example. The total is $51,000 right there. So it's important that we process some type of procurement mechanism so that our purchases are legal, that they are compliant with the state law. So we process an RFP where vendors submit their proposals for their catalogs and with certain discounts, certain delivery terms, certain freight terms, and so that's how we are able to comply with the threshold. The next slide shows how the bid process works. So from the very beginning, the need is established by either the department head or the campus principal. Specifications are developed. They'll be developed by that requesting department head and campus principal in conjunction with purchasing. We generate the vendor list from those vendors that have registered in our system and any other vendors that the department head or principal may be aware of. We prepare invitations to bid. We prepare those documents, the advertisement. The bid is posted on our e-bidding system, and that invitation is sent to all vendors that are registered through our e-bidding system. And any other vendors that see the advertisement in the newspaper are also invited, and they're guided so they can participate in the bid process. We provide vendors an opportunity to ask questions. So we tell them to become familiar with the specifications, with our terms and conditions, and we give them a deadline to ask questions. So if there's any new information that needs to be provided based on those inquiries we received, then we turn around, we process an addendum, and we post it on our e-bidding system so all vendors receive the exact same information. Once the deadline occurs, we have a bid opening. Currently, through the pandemic, our bid openings are conducted through Zoom. So we have a tab in our e-bidding system where we post the link to the Zoom bid opening, and vendors attend at their leisure. Once the bid opening takes place, then we prepare a bid tabulation in purchasing. Then the evaluation of bids occur. And this is the time when the evaluation committee gathers, and depending on the extent of that procurement will determine how many people participate. Then there's a recommendation submitted. We bring an agenda item to our school board, and our school board takes action. And once that occurs, then our department disseminates the awarded, board awarded tabulation and rationale to our department head or principal that requested it, and then the secretary processes the PO. So after that, then is the delivery of goods and services, and that then that requesting department head or campus principal will monitor vendor performance. If there are any issues, they communicate with purchasing. So if there's any conflict resolution that needs to take place, we take part in that to help them resolve it. Now, as far as selecting vendors, according to Texas Government Code 44.031, those are the evaluation factors that we can take into consideration: the purchase price, the reputation of the vendor and their goods and services, the quality of those goods and services, the extent to which they meet our district's needs, the vendor's past relationship with the district, the impact on the ability of the district to comply with laws and rules relating to historically underutilized businesses. And really and truly, there are no state laws mandating that. But when it comes to federal procurement, we do check. We check to see if they are minority women business enterprises. And then the long-term cost to the district to acquire those goods and services. And then for a contract for goods and services other than goods and services related to telecommunications and information services, building construction and maintenance or instructional materials, whether the vendor or the vendor's ultimate parent company or majority owner has their principal place of business in the state, or if they employ at least 500 persons in the state. And then any other relevant factor that we specifically include in our request for bids or proposals. And in awarding a contract by competitive sealed bid under this section, we can also, if we have our central administrative office in a municipality with a population of less than 250,000 people, we may consider the bidder's principal place of business in the manner provided by, oh, that got erased, 8th section, I believe it's, I can see it. It might be 270.
271.
Okay, perfect. All right. So the local government code. And so this is the criteria we use. Now, number 8, we cannot use if we are procuring with federal funds. Oh my goodness, this froze. Let's see. Okay, I'll come back. Oh, my goodness. I got it. Okay, then, so we have bid ranking, and we use the evaluation matrices that were approved by our school board on May 12th of 2021. So this is the matrix that we use for the standard state and local funded procurement. This is the one we use for federally funded, for professional services, and for construction. So there are two types of contracts that we use. Those that are generated through our school district based on those bids and proposals that we process, and those through the purchasing cooperative contracts. So the purchasing cooperatives are organizations or agencies that offer competitively solicited purchasing contracts for supplies, equipment, and services to member entities such as the Joya ISD. They aggregate volumes, so that means that they raise the purchasing power of its members. And members join through an interlocal agreement or resolution approved by our school board or the governing body of those entities that become members. So it saves us on administrative costs, they promote efficiency, and we take advantage of their volume power. This is a list of the various purchasing cooperatives that are available to us through your permission, through the interlocal agreements and resolutions. Okay, so the next couple of slides show the purchasing levels. They're quick reference guides. The first is for local and state-funded procurement. So whenever there's a purchase of goods and services less than $15,000, our district campuses and departments need to use the bid awarded vendors approved by our board of trustees or the purchasing cooperative vendors. If what they're looking for is not available through those vendors, then we may consider that purchase as a spot purchase. But we are very, very careful with that because we're such a large district that if 3 campuses are each asking that we approved a $20,000 purchase through a vendor that's not awarded through our board or a purchasing cooperative, then we're going to infringe upon the bid threshold and those purchases will become illegal. So we keep a very we monitor that very, very closely. So spot purchases are few and far between. So then, if they have the need for a spot purchase, the campus, requesting campus or department need to contact us at purchasing so we can assist them. We always encourage price comparisons because $15,000 is still a lot of money. So we want to make sure that we get the best value to the district. The amount was set at $15,000 to promote efficiency district-wide to meet district needs. However, that is the requirement as far as state and local funds are concerned in regards to quotations. If the purchase is from $15,000 to $49,999, we will require 2 quotes from the requester, whether it be a campus or department. If the purchase is over $50,000 and there's no bid in place, then we'll have to process a formal bid or RFP for that requester. Now, if the goods or services are available through an RFP that our school board previously awarded, then we'll request the 2 quotes and school board approval, unless it's one of those categories that are exempt through local board policies. So we came before our school board in prior months asking our board that to increase our administrative flexibility in certain categories. Through the pandemic, we needed to process purchases in excess of $50,000 for personal protective equipment, for furniture, for computer hardware, etc. So administratively, we came before the board, and the board approved that modification for our CH local, and we have been able to be much more efficient with the board's authorization of that. Purchasing compliance is still in place, so all those transactions are legal. However, not having to bring them before the board every single time is promoting efficiency in getting those instructional materials, especially out to the campuses. The next slide is federally funded procurement. And so when it comes to federal funds, if there's going to, every single purchase less than $50,000 requires a minimum of 2 quotes. So the Code of Federal Regulations states that we must have an adequate number of vendors. Well, there's a lot of ambiguity in that code. So the Texas Education Agency's interpretation of that is that an adequate number of vendors is at least 2. So for all purchases less than $50,000, we require a minimum of 2 quotes through our board-awarded vendors or the purchasing cooperatives. If they're not available through them, then we will look very closely to determine whether we will approve a spot purchase or not, just the way we do with local and state funds. If the purchase is over $50,000, then, and there's no bid in place, then we will process a bid for that procurement. And if the goods are available through a previously board-awarded bid or through a purchasing cooperative, then as long as we get the 2 quotes, we're going to approve that purchase. If the purchase is over $250,000, in addition to the prior requirements, we also require the independent estimate form and a cost price analysis, because that's required by the EDGAR. In the next slide, you see a really busy flow chart. And so the green oval is the secretary at the campus or department level entering the requisition. Then it goes to the principal for approval. If the principal sees there's an issue with that purchase, that principal can disapprove it. If there's no issue, no concern, then it proceeds to the next level, which could be special funding. So if there's special funding involved, say that it's federal funds, it would go to Mr. J.R. Flores, for example, and he would review it for compliance with the program objectives, etc. If there's issues with it, he can disapprove it. If it's technology or food or special education, it would go to that respective director as well. If the order is over $25,000, it'll go through Mr. Joel Trevino, our Chief Financial Officer, for review and approval, and then it would go to our Superintendent of Schools before it finally comes to purchasing. So at every level, there's checks and balances so that requisition, depending on the type of goods and services that are purchased and the amount that the purchase is for, would determine how many levels it goes through. And then ultimately, it comes to the purchasing department for final review. So when it makes it to our department, we make sure that if it's an item that requires board approval, that our school board approved. That if it's an item that requires that the vendor have a certificate of insurance or a payment and performance bond, or if it's federally funded, that they be on the SAMS database, that we verify that the vendor has not been debarred or suspended. So there's a lot of measures at purchasing that we check in addition to the correct coding. So our staff has been trained to verify that it's aligned with the function, that it's aligned with the object code. So there's a lot of intricacies involved with that. And so this is a snapshot of what the process is like. Now, in our department, we're always looking for ways to innovate and become more efficient. And so one of the methods is through our e-bidding system. We also have an e-commerce marketplace where our staff log into our finance system and are able to punch out and purchase from board-awarded vendors. And so this is a process that we are very excited about, and it continues to grow, and I wanted to take a moment and mention that as well. So now we have an opportunity to ask questions on anything that I've covered or anything that I may not have covered that you may have a question in regards to procurement. Before we turn it over to Joe, Joe will cover construction and job order contracts.
Sylvia, in the aggregate for the 50,000, how do you, for example, with consultants, who checks to make sure, let's say, 5 principals are, hiring a consultant and it's going to cost them $20,000 each. It's the same consultant, so I know it falls under that aggregate for the district. Who checks on that?
Okay, so we already have a consultant services request for proposals, Dr. B. In 2019, the Texas Education Agency updated the Financial Accountability System Resource Guide. In the prior volume, they had a section that allowed us to rely on an old Dan Morales opinion. I don't remember, it was 418 or so, that allowed us to contract with consultants based on their level of skill, expertise, etc. And so they eliminated that section. And so our attorneys may be able to argue that opinion still stands. However, we did not want to take a chance, so we implemented an RFP specifically for consultant services. So if we see a consultant agreement coming through, we automatically check the list to make sure that the consultants are there. If they're not there, then if the amount is very minimal, we'll approve it, but we're keeping track. So in regards to answering your question, we're keeping track of that in purchasing to make sure that we don't infringe upon that bid threshold. And so, we've been able to add more and more consultants, as you've seen when we come just about in every board meeting, adding more consultants. So the consultants have been more receptive now that they know that that's the way we do business. We have approved some spot purchases, but they're very minimal.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Any other questions?
So in other words, if we have 3 different campuses and they want the same consultant, then you bring it to us so that we can approve it? Because let's say they're charging $20,000 each.
Absolutely.
Okay.
They have to participate in the request for proposals process. It's that consultant services RFP that I talked about earlier, that's open all the way through August 31st. So our purchasing buyer, Rochelle, works very closely with that solicitation, and she takes the time to guide those consultants step by step to make sure that they submit all the attachments that are necessary as far as their credentials, their program description, the pricing, their references, insurance. If we estimate that we're going to spend more than $25,000 with them, insurance requirements are much more stringent. So there is a lot of work that takes place on the consultant's behalf in order for them to become awarded. So once they comply with all those submissions, then Rochelle prepares the tabulation, and we bring it before our school board for approval.
So then let's say that down the line there's another campuses that wants the same consultant and it's another 20,000. Do you bring it to us because it's already past the 50,000? Or you just...
No. What we bring before the board will be the list. If any single purchase is going to be over $50,000, then we'll bring that before the board in addition to the first list.
So what she's, just to clarify, what Ms. Hernandez is trying to get to is, and correct me if I'm wrong,
Yeah.
if let's say we hire the consultant once, it's 20, and in another school 20, and another school 20, it wouldn't necessarily come to our attention because all of them have been less than 50.
Correct.
Right? It's not cumulative, like, let's say
Correct.
3 schools would have been 60, still no, right?
No, because local board policy states any single purchase
Less-
of $50,000 or more. With the exception of all those items such as PPE, furniture, et cetera.
We may have to revisit that policy.
Yeah. So we don't have like, once, like, for example, the same vendor, the same consultant, after he has reached over the 50, doesn't matter that he's passes that, because it's just a one-time purchase of 50,000.
That's correct.
Okay. My other question is, when you go in and put something in for a bid, how do you normally, let's say, the air purifiers, for example, how do you go in and plug that in what you want? Is there like a requirement that you put in there so everybody can go out and bid, or it's something that comes back from the vendor? Because I've seen where you recommend to us, but there are different model numbers, okay? And some of them do have what we ask for or in common, but we really don't know exactly what you're asking for. I don't know if you understand my question. I mean, do you put something in there of what you want?
Yes, yes,
Like a
so
model number or
we'll
no?
specify the item with detailed specifications and a brand and model. Sometimes with federal funds, we try not to include a brand or model, just so we're not accused of being restricted with the specifications. We always want to promote full and open competition, regardless of whether we're using local funds, state funds, or federal funds, okay? But when we are working with federal funds, we try to be extra careful in the sense of not even mentioning a branded model if we don't have to, just so we are not accused that we're restricting competition.
So you go in and you plug in exactly what is it that you want, and then it's thrown to the vendors? And then
We'll specify, and we tell the vendors that the branded model or the specifications are to depict the desired level of quality. However, if they have something comparable or better, they're more than welcome to submit an alternate. We do not restrict competition in that regard.
Okay. Thank you.
Yes. Any other questions? Okay. Joe?
Thank you.
Thank you. Ms.
Thank
Clark.
you.
Good evening, everyone. I'm just going to cover the procurement process for the construction side, which falls under my department. So the following slide, the first slide, or slide 28, you'll see the steps that we take when we have a project, construction project planning. Step 1 is board or committee approves project. Step 2, funds become available for project. Step 3, selection of engineer or architect for the project. Step 4, the engineer or the architect develops plans and specifications. Step 5, procurement of construction services. Step 6, notice to proceed issued to contractor. And the last step is the construction begins. So when we start a project, or when we're thinking of procuring a project, we need to make sure that we follow these procurement laws under the construction side. We do have Texas Education Code Chapter 44. the Texas Government Code, Chapter 2269, which relates to construction services or public works, the Texas Government Code, Chapter 2254, which is for certain professional services, the federal regulations, which is for purchases or services using federal funds, and the Texas Occupation Code 1001, which deals with engineers and architects. So when do we need to engage the services of an engineer or an architect? School districts are required to have plans and specifications prepared and construction supervised by architects and engineers on most school district construction projects. So when are they required? For an engineer, they're required if the project involves mechanical or electrical engineering and will cost more than $8,000, or the project does not require mechanical or electrical engineering and will cost $20,000 or more. For architects, it's a little different. They are required for construction of new building if construction cost exceeds $100,000. On the other hand, if the district alters or adds onto an existing building, the district must hire an architect if the project requires removal, relocation, or addition of walls, partitions, or exits, and the construction cost exceeds $50,000. The following slide is a flow chart that is very helpful when determining if we need an engineer. We fall under the public works projects. So that would be the left-hand side of that flow chart. So you can see there is electrical or mechanical engineer involved. Then you follow the flow chart, and it'll tell you if you need to hire the services. The following flow chart is for architects. So if you follow there where it says start, is it a public building? Yes. Institution or residential facility? No. And then you follow and you find out if you do need an architect again, if it's $100,000 or more on a new building, or if it's a renovation and it's $50,000 or more, given the restrictions that I gave right now. So how do we select architects or engineers? So once we determine that we need an engineer, we need to make sure we follow these laws, the procurement laws. So for architects and engineers, we cannot be chosen by competitive bidding. Instead, a school district must select and award the contract for those professional services on the basis of competence and qualifications to perform the services and for a fair and reasonable price. Requests for qualifications or RFQs, although not required, the best practice is to evaluate architects or engineers using RFQs. An RFQ is used to solicit information from multiple companies in order to generate a pool of prospective services or service providers, which we do have a pool of engineers and architects in place right now. The following slide. So these are the procurement methods under Chapter 2269 of the Government Code. These are the authorized methods: competitive bidding, competitive sealed proposals, construction manager agent, construction manager at risk, design build, job order contracts, and interlocal or purchasing cooperatives. Today I'm going to go over competitive sealed proposals and job order contracts. So the first one is competitive sealed proposals. Competitive sealed proposals is considered to be a procurement method by which the government entity requests proposals, ranks the offers, negotiates as prescribed, and then contracts with general contractor for the construction, rehab, alteration, or repair of a facility. The RFP must include the selection criteria and weight of criteria, and the award is based on the contractor providing the best value for the district. The district must have an architect or an engineer prepare the construction documents and assist with the procurement process. So the ranking criteria, I know Ms. Zapata had some of these up there in her presentation, but this is the one that we use for construction services. So you can see the weight that is given to these criteria. Like, for example, the purchase price has 50 points. And then you follow the criteria down the line, and each one has a certain number of points assigned to it. So when we do the ranking, we go over each and every one of those and come up with a final number. The following one is the evaluation metrics for federally funded projects. So it's very similar to the other one. It's just about four different criteria towards the bottom that differs, but it's the same process. So evaluation and ranking. The district is required to include the criteria and weight of the criteria in the RFP or RFQ, request for qualifications, unless the price criteria is weighted at 100%. It is possible that the number one ranked proposer will not be the lowest price proposer. The committee reviews all documentation provided by bidders and makes a recommendation to the superintendent and to the board of trustees. After that, negotiations with the first ranked proposer takes place, and they submit a best and final negotiated price, which we bring to the board for consideration. And then we create a standard form of agreement between the owner and the contractor. The next one is job order contracts. A job order contract is a procurement method used for maintenance, repairs, alterations, renovations, remediations, or minor construction of a facility. A way to get numerous commonly encountered construction-related projects done more quickly and easily. If a job order contract requires an architect or an engineer, the district must have an architect or engineer prepare the construction documents for the project. Under this method, a contractor submits unit prices for specific types of work. The unit price may also be a factor or a coefficient to be applied to a published estimating price book, such as RS means cost data. So what we do is we first review a job and determine if professional services are needed. We select a vendor based on qualifications and demonstrated competence from the list of approved vendors that is already in place. Vendors must use this price book requested on bid solicitation and the McAllen City Cost Index when they bid. We try to negotiate the price, and of course, projects valued at $50,000 or more do require board approval. And lastly, we do try to rotate these vendors when we look at these jobs that are needed at the school district. Questions?
Who monitors the rotation of vendors?
We do. We have a list that when we meet with my administrators, we meet weekly. So we kind of go over what vendors we're using and what we can do to get some other vendors involved.
On the 50,000, can the district just set any amount? Like, for example, if we wanted to reduce the 50,000, we can do that?
I'm not sure if that's something we can do.
Can you respond to the question? Are you responding to the question, Sylvia? So that
My question
everyone can hear.
my question is if we as a board can change the 50,000 threshold.
Yes, Dr. B, that can be changed through CH local policy.
Okay. And what would be, what's the least amount that we can have?
It's at the board's discretion.
Okay.
It would require substantial administrative work to bring lower scale purchases for board approval. So there will be a price tag associated with that. In other words, the lower the board establishes that threshold, the more administrative assistance we're going to need at purchasing and facilities to be able to assist in processing those agenda items.
Thank you, Sylvia.
I have a question on, let's say we are remodeling, just let's say a wall, okay? Do we put in what we need, or how is that determined? I mean, how do you go about saying, do you bring the vendors in and tell them, what we want done individually, or how do you go bidding on it?
Yeah, so once we select a vendor, we go and visit the site. We do a walkthrough. We tell them what we need. We show them exactly what we need. So they submit. Again, going back to one of the slides, they have to submit a price based on the McAllen Cost Index, which is it's a book that already establishes unit prices for certain things like demolition, like flooring, like carpeting, like, they have everything. So those unit prices are already there. So they submit their proposals based on those unit prices, and they have to also apply the coefficient that they supplied during the solicitation process. So for example, a certain vendor might have proposed a coefficient of 0.9. So what does that mean? Is that whatever the cost or whatever the unit price says, they're gonna charge 0.9 of that, or 90%. So it's more like a discount. It acts more like a discount, and they are allowed to provide any extra discounts, other than the 0.9 that they submitted.
Okay, so the McAllen law that you're saying, does it change pretty often? Because we're seeing that the lumber is going up and down. So is that something that is updated frequently, or?
I believe it's like every 6 months they update those prices. It's every 6 months or a year, if I'm not mistaken.
I noticed that if you want to become a vendor, you have to buy a program that is called the Forklift. Can you explain to me a little bit of what the program is? Because I saw it, and it's something like they help you out, like to bid it out. Like a lot of times they would say you need 20 studs, okay? But everybody should be in the same page instead of putting 28. Is that something like, or can you just explain to me what the Forklift is, the program?
So the Forklifts, that's just a software that helps these vendors when they're quoting out or giving us a price for whatever work is needed. It's just a software, but in the software itself, the RS Means price book, that is embedded in the software. But Forklifts doesn't mean that that's the only one available. There's other softwares available that have the RS Means McAllen CCI embedded in it. It's just that when we first went through the job order contract bids, I remember doing like a little research, and Forklifts was very easy to use. So we started using that at first. So that's what we kind of told some of these vendors, hey, this software is pretty easy to use if you want to purchase, but you have to purchase it.
That's a requirement that we have in the district, that the vendor has to have it.
If you are going to submit a bid through the job order contract, you need to have that software. Any type of software that has a RS Means embedded in it.
Okay, thank you.
And when do the vendors get told that?
During the solicitation process that goes through purchasing, they get a package and they're told exactly what price book, what they need to include when they do the bid. So it's already in there when they submit the proposal.
And the solicitations, Sylvia, are they done like once a year, or how often are the solicitations done?
Because this is a program that is, it has to be renewed yearly, and it's a pretty pricey one. So I was just asking to see if we do use it. I mean, is it something that a vendor goes in and plugs in their bids under that, or how does it work? Because it doesn't say, it just says that you need to get it.
Dr. B, to answer your question, we have the ability to process the solicitation at any time that Joe says, I have a need to supplement vendors because the current vendors that I have may not meet district needs in a certain category. So we have language embedded in there to where we can supplement. So right now we have 3 job order contracts in place. And so, again, at Joe's discretion and his administrative team, he can request that we process another one if we need to supplement vendors.
Thank you. Ms.
Did we
Hernandez,
address Ms. Hernandez's
did
question?
your question get answered?
Yeah, so do we use that program a lot with the vendors, the 4-click?
Most of the vendors do use the 4-clicks. Most of the vendors that we deal with do have that software.
Okay, well, they should have it, I mean, because that's a requirement that we have it.
The RS means is a requirement.
What about the 4-click?
The 4-clicks, that's just it's more like a software that helps you develop these quotations. But they can use, other softwares are available out there as long as the RS means price books are in that software.
You just recommend it because it's easy to use.
I'm sorry?
You just recommend it because it's easy to use.
Yes.
But they are required to use, they don't have to use that, they can use another one.
Yes, they can use another software as long as they're using the RS means price that we ask for the solicitation process. As long as they use it, they can use another type of software if they want.
Thank you. Any other questions?
Thank you.
If there are no other questions, I know we're going to be pressed for time because we have Dr. Cantu that has to attend an open house for her son, and that's important. So thank you to Ms. Zapata and to Mr. Villarreal for their presentation. This concludes our board training, and our board training is ending or adjourning at 6:36 p.m.